Saturday morning at 8:02, I stood in my driveway staring at the banner zip-tied across my farm stand sign. The words, "Closed by order of HOA," flapped in the morning breeze like some kind of suburban surrender flag, the cheap vinyl crinkling with each gust. I could see where she'd used 4 zip ties, pulled so tight they'd started to warp my hand-painted wooden sign. 5 minutes hadn't even passed before the church bells rang down the street, and I watched as 36 people lined up anyway, clutching their travel coffee mugs and reusable produce bags like they were preparing for battle. They ignored that banner completely. Every single time someone bought a tomato, the crowd actually cheered and clapped. One kid, couldn't have been more than 7 years old, held up a cucumber over his head like it was the Olympic torch, parading it down the line while his mother laughed. An elderly woman in a sun hat bought 6 ears of corn and told me loudly that she'd been buying for me for 2 years and no clipboard tyrant was going to stop her now. I'm pretty sure my zucchini turned red from all the attention and applause. My name is Caleb Whitaker. I used to write software in a high-rise downtown, debugging code and sitting in meetings about meetings until I realized I was allergic to fluorescent lighting and corporate jargon. 5 years ago, I left all that behind. These days I grow tomatoes, 10 chickens, and try to stay out of everyone's way. My little ranch house sits right at the edge of Foxbury Commons, this HOA development that appeared in Cedar Hollow about 3 years ago like someone dropped a suburb catalog onto farmland and decided uniformity was more important than character. The houses all look the same, gray with white trim, black mailboxes, concrete driveways you could perform surgery on. My property, by contrast, has a gravel driveway with wildflowers growing along the edges, a chicken coop painted barn red, and a garden that looks like organized chaos if you squint. I keep things simple. I wake up at dawn to water everything before the sun gets too aggressive. My compost pile smells like a forest floor after a good rain, earthy and alive. On weekends, I run a small farm stand with an honesty jar, fresh eggs still warm from the nesting boxes, and bread my neighbor bakes in her wood-fired oven that she built herself from a YouTube tutorial. The stand itself is just a wooden table under an old canvas canopy, with baskets and a chalkboard showing prices. Nothing fancy. Nothing that should bother anyone. That's when I met Bernice Lowell. Bernice is the HOA president, and she carries a clipboard like it's holstered to her hip, always attached with a retractable cord clipped to her belt loop. Her smile has the warmth of a speed limit sign on a highway. She wears khaki capris year-round and those white tennis shoes that look like they've never touched actual dirt. The first time she walked past my stand, she stopped dead in her tracks, stared at my sunflowers towering along the fence line, and actually said with a straight face that they were an act of visual aggression. Visual aggression. Like my flowers were personally attacking the concept of beige vinyl siding and manicured hedges trimmed into geometric submission. She called my farm stand retail blight during an HOA meeting I wasn't invited to but heard about anyway. Small towns talk, and in Cedar Hollow, they talk fast. 3 different neighbors texted me photos of her PowerPoint presentation, which included a slide with my farm stand circled in red like a crime scene photo. The letters started arriving weekly, always in the same cream-colored HOA envelopes with her signature in aggressive blue ink. The first one complained about unapproved signage, claiming my hand-painted "fresh eggs and produce" sign violated Section 12.4 of some aesthetic guideline I'd never agreed to. The second cited unsanctioned commerce and mentioned traffic concerns, even though we're talking about maybe 15 cars on a Saturday morning. The third one, and I am not making this up, accused me of ostentatious produce arrangement. Apparently, stacking tomatoes in a pyramid was too visually stimulating for the neighborhood. Bernice claimed the smell of my basil was medically distracting to residents with sensitive constitutions, and she attached a printed article about aromatherapy side effects that had nothing to do with fresh herbs. She started taking photos of my stand from behind my hedges like she was conducting surveillance. One afternoon, I caught her measuring my cucumbers with an actual ruler, muttering something about uniformity standards. When none of that worked, she escalated to printing flyers and leaving them on windshields in the neighborhood. They said, "Buying here voids your HOA insurance," in bold letters, with a $sign instead of an S because apparently she thought that made it more official. Then came the day she marched up my driveway with 2 board members and a handheld decibel meter. She was there to prove my wind chimes were inciting unrest among the residents. I watched her hold that meter up to a ceramic chime that barely tinkled in the breeze. She filmed my customers like they were shoplifting oxygen. That evening, I pulled out my property deed and a copy of the town ordinance that explicitly allows roadside agricultural sales on properties zoned rural residential, which mine is. I highlighted the relevant section in yellow, attached it to a response letter, and added a sticky note that said, "Basil is not contraband." I mailed it to the HOA office with a return receipt. Bernice didn't appreciate my sense of humor. 2 weeks later, she called the county health inspector and reported that I was selling unrefrigerated fish from my farm stand. Fish. I sell tomatoes, eggs that I keep in a cooler with ice packs, and occasional jars of jam with ingredient labels I print myself. The inspector showed up on a Tuesday morning, walked around my stand for 10 minutes, checked my cooler temperature, and left with a pint of cherry tomatoes and a handwritten receipt. Before he drove off, he told me someone was wasting his time. Bernice's next move was calling the police. She filed a report claiming my farm stand was causing commercial traffic that disrupted a gated community. The problem with that complaint was obvious to anyone with eyes. My farm stand faces Elm Road, which is a public street. I'm not inside Foxbury Commons. I'm not even governed by their HOA. I just exist near their development, which apparently offended Bernice the way jazz clarinet offends people with no sense of rhythm. Finally, she went nuclear. I woke up one Saturday at dawn to find Bernice in my driveway with zip ties and that banner. She'd also placed orange traffic cones in the bike lane on Elm Road, creating an actual traffic hazard in the name of safety. She stood there with her arms crossed, watching me discover her handiwork like she'd just won a tactical victory. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I called the town zoning officer instead. His name is Martin, and he's been doing this job for 20 years with the patience of a man who has seen every ridiculous property dispute imaginable. He showed up within an hour, carrying a rolled-up parcel map and what I can only describe as a patience defect. He spread that map across the hood of his truck and traced the property lines with his finger. Martin looked at Bernice and said very slowly, "Caleb's parcel is outside your HOA boundaries. He has permitted agricultural retail use. There are no violations." Then he turned and pointed at the orange cones she'd placed in the bike lane. "You cannot enforce HOA rules on properties you don't govern, and you definitely cannot obstruct a public right-of-way with traffic cones." Bernice tried to interrupt with something about property values, but Martin just held up his hand. "Property values are not laws," he said. "Laws are laws." While this conversation was happening, my phone was buzzing. The Cedar Hollow Farmers Association had sent out a mass text that said, "Farm stand under attack. Bring your appetite." My buddy who runs the hardware store called and said he was lending me his portable chalkboard. I set it up on the grass and wrote in big letters, "Open." Bernice says no. Town says yes. Vote with your breakfast. By noon, Elm Road looked like someone had organized a harvest festival powered entirely by community spite and really good produce. Cars lined both sides of the street. Families spread blankets on the grass. The bakery from downtown set up a folding table with a red gingham tablecloth and brought fresh baguettes, sourdough loaves, and cinnamon rolls that made the whole block smell like a dream. The coffee shop rolled out their mobile cart, the one they usually save for the farmer's market, and started serving lattes with foam art shaped like little vegetables. A guy with a fiddle appeared out of nowhere, sat on my fence rail, and started playing folk songs like the universe had summoned him specifically for this moment. Kids were dancing. Dogs were getting belly rubs. Someone brought a cooler of lemonade and started passing out cups. The mayor stopped by around 12:30, bought a basket of peaches, and posed for photos with at least a dozen customers. She told me, loud enough for everyone to hear, that small farms were the backbone of Cedar Hollow's identity. Martin, the zoning officer, came back with his wife and bought 3 jars of pickles, 2 bags of green beans, and a bouquet of sunflowers he said were for his mother's birthday. A reporter from the Cedar Hollow Gazette showed up with a photographer and interviewed a golden retriever wearing a bandana that said, "Produce Patriot," while its owner explained that supporting local farms was a family value. That's when Bernice came charging back up the road. She had a whistle around her neck, the kind coaches use, and a stack of what looked like official citations in her hand. Her face was already red before she even started yelling. She blew that whistle so loud a toddler started crying, and she started shouting about permits and violations and the collapse of civilized society. She waved those papers over her head and announced she was issuing fines to everyone for participating in illegal commerce. A man buying lettuce asked her what authority she had to fine anyone not in the HOA, and she told him to mind his business while simultaneously making his business her business. But then the health inspector rolled up again, the same guy from before, and this time he had a cooler in his trunk because he wanted to buy 24 eggs for his family and his in-laws. He was in a good mood until he saw those orange cones still sitting in the bike lane, creating a hazard. His entire demeanor changed. He looked at Bernice, then looked at the cones, and pulled out his own citation book. He asked her who placed the cones. She said she did, for safety reasons. He wrote her a ticket right there for obstructing a public right-of-way, a $300 fine, and told her she had 15 days to pay or contest it in court. Two cyclists in neon spandex stopped and gave Bernice a theatrical thumbs down and slow clapped. The HOA board members who'd come with her suddenly remembered they had other places to be and disappeared like butter melting on a hot griddle. When Bernice tried to grab my chalkboard and pull it down, the mayor gently took it from her hands and said, directly into the reporter's camera, "In Cedar Hollow, we support small farms and people who can read maps." The consequences came fast and hit like a falling anvil in a cartoon. The town fined Bernice $300 for obstructing the right-of-way. She tried to argue it in the town clerk's office, insisting she was protecting the community, but the clerk just pointed to the statute and the photographic evidence from 3 different people. The HOA's insurance company sent a certified letter reminding the board that their authority stopped at their property boundaries, and any further overreach could result in the loss of their liability coverage. That letter used words like actionable and legal exposure that made the board members very nervous. The board held an emergency meeting 2 days later. I heard it lasted 4 hours and got heated enough that someone threw a binder. They voted 6-1 to remove Bernice as president, with only Bernice voting against her own removal. They also issued what they called a unilateral enforcement ban, which meant she couldn't take any HOA actions on her own for the next 5 years without board approval. She had to surrender her clipboard and her master key to the community mailbox. One board member told me later that Bernice cried and said they were betraying everything she'd sacrificed for, which apparently included 3 years of measuring people's lawn heights and writing violation notices about Christmas lights in January. But the best part came last. The judge who handled her obstruction citation offered her a choice: pay the $300 fine plus court costs, or complete 80 hours of community service. Bernice chose community service, probably thinking it would be easier. The judge assigned her to supervise the Cedar Hollow community garden, the same one she tried to shut down 2 years ago for being too visible from the street. When she showed up for her first shift on a Saturday morning, wearing gloves that still had the tags on them, the gardeners had labeled every single plant with little handmade signs. Tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, squash, herbs, everything. Each sign said the same thing: not a fish. They'd even put one on the compost bin. Bernice stood there in the middle of the garden, staring at a Cherokee purple tomato plant with its label, and her face turned the exact color of a ripe heirloom. Someone had also planted a row of basil right at the entrance, and the smell must have been medically distracting because she sneezed 4 times and asked if she could leave. The garden supervisor, a retired teacher with a wicked sense of humor, told her those 80 hours weren't going to complete themselves and handed her a watering can.